All right, welcome everyone to this Commonland webinar, Landscape Restoration. How do we actually do this? My name is Hester and I'll be your host and moderator for today, and I'm working at Commonland as landscape developer. So why are we all here today? Faced with a giant threat of landscape degradation worldwide, it's easy to feel small. Faced with the long-term and energy-intense task of holistic restoration, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Faced with the complex web of sometimes competing stakeholder interests, it's easy to feel alone. But we can do this. We can restore landscapes as long as we're guided by facts and not by myths. So that is why we've decided to host this event, and probably the reason why you're all here today. So for today, we've invited 6 experts to help us bust 3 misconceptions about landscape restoration. Partnerships are all talk, no action. A shared understanding is just about data, and a landscape vision is a top-down process. After these 3 conversations, we'll have a roundtable discussion where you can ask your questions. So please put any questions you have in the Q&A below using the Q&A button. But before we start with the conversations about the myths, I would also like to mention that this event today marks the official launch of the For Returns Guidebook. Just a little bit of background. Commonland joined forces with our partners Wetlands International and Landscape Finance Lab, who are both virtually present today, with the goal to share lessons learned from more than a decade of testing the For Returns framework, which can hopefully help you to get started, to move faster, overcome barriers, or to create a greater impact with your landscape initiative. Speaking of which, we have a short video to share with you, but be warned, the people in the video are very talented and professional actors.
According to the UN, up to 40% of the world's land is degraded. Land degradation affects 3.2 billion people globally. The world is currently facing the largest species extinction event since the dinosaur age.
Around 1/3 of the planet's farmland is degraded.
50% of the world's GDP is at risk due to nature loss.
Of inland wetlands have
In large
disappeared
part due
since
to landscape
600
degradation.
million
Wildlife
people
populations have
globally are
declined
projected
by an
to
average
face hunger in
67%
2030.
in the past 50
Human
years.
activities have
1 in
altered
3%
areas
globally
of the
struggle with
landscape
moderate to
South
severe
America
food insecurity.
degraded.
Okay, well, that was all very depressing.
Yeah, so what are we going to do about it?
If only there was a guidebook based on over a decade of experience, compiled by experts and practitioners from around the world, to help us achieve long-term, large-scale, holistic landscape restoration.
Well, now that you mention it, to find out about how you can build a lasting partnership, develop a shared understanding, build a landscape vision and plan, take collective action, and carry out monitoring and learning, go visit forreturns.commonland.com.
Oh, great!
I've just shared a link to the guidebook with you in the chat, and my colleague Rose, the other person you saw in the video, will chat to you later about what's in the various chapters in a bit more detail. But for now, I'm very excited to introduce our first speakers who will be busting the first myth: partnerships are all talk, no action. Here to tackle this myth are Marijn Zwinkels and Justin Gird. Justin is Director and Landscape Coordinator at Living.land in South Africa. He's managing a research center and is constantly engaging with relevant stakeholders in the area. If that isn't fruitful ground for a conversation about partnerships, I don't know what is. Of course, he's not alone in this conversation. Virtually sitting next to him is Marijn Zwinkels. Marijn is Team Lead Africa for Commonland, which means he's developing and coordinating Commonland's work on the African continent. Justin and Marijn, thanks for being here today. I'm very curious to hear about your experiences with building partnerships. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hester. And I don't see Justin. Can I see Justin? Because that talks much better. But if I don't see him, then I will just start the chat. Yeah, when Hester asked me to talk about partnerships, I'm not sure if we are busting anything. I straight away thought about Justin and to invite him for this chat. Justin works for Living.land And Living Lands tagline is basically collaborations working on living landscapes. But on the other hand, I'm also knowing him while working with him about what was a very inspiring quote for me, that partnerships are the only ships that don't sail. So my question to you, Justin, to start it, when are we starting a partnership, and what not, or what is your vision on partnerships?
Thanks, Marijn. Yeah, just on a side note on the quote, that's a quote that my grandfather used quite a long time ago. And he just said, be very aware of partnerships. My grandfather was a very old farmer. He was skeptical of partnerships. And he was really thought he could do it all on his own. But yeah, I think we've reviewed that since. But I think definitely where there's a myth, there's a little bit of a truth behind it. So I think going back to the myth of partnerships all talk, I think you definitely find that some partnerships are all talk and that good partnerships succeed. And I think the question should rather be how to make a good partnership succeed. And when to start a partnership is also, I think some people just try to start partnerships for the sake of it, and then those are mainly probably going to be doomed to failure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also something of this, what we do in the NGO world, that we are very good at just building partnerships. I think there's also a lot of, I think Living Lands is a good example of having their feet on the ground, doing the work. And I can imagine there's a lot of organizations that jumping on the train that you're on just to claiming the success. So when do you think about partnerships as Living Lands as beneficial, or do you see them? What kind of partnerships do you have? Is it just a funder? Are you working together with other organizations, or what is the main partnerships you work with on a daily basis, or at least are beneficial for you?
Sure. I think in the NGO sector, I think coming back to why create a partnership, it's we face with such complex challenges that you can't have all the skills in-house. I think especially if you just take ecology. Ecology is a very complex systems. It's dealing with multiple facets. If you could do everything in-house, I think it's just you'd be too big. So you definitely need to create multitude. And that's a great question in terms of what does a partnership look like? Because we've got small partnerships one-on-one, which are very informal. They're more like relationships almost. And then you get to the more very formal, multi-sectoral partnerships that have got huge agreements, that have got partnership managers in place to make sure that they work well. And yes, it's a real range. I think the best partnership we have at the moment, definitely, Marijn, is our partnership with the mountain zebra. Hey, you, me, and Jim. Yes. I think that's a very loose, informal partnership, but it works.
Yeah. Yes. No. By definition, I think that is people coming together with different skill resources to create impact. But it's also that is a simple one. That is just a few individuals coming together. And what I see when of course, as Commonland, our work is partnership development. We are working with partners, and what you see in building partnerships, that it's taking a lot of effort to understand one another. We work all over the world. It's a lot about Zoom. You need to build those partnerships. People move on. You get other people that you need to work with. So again, a quote which I always find fascinating, and I just want your reaction on that as well. That if you want to move, I think it's even an African quote, but it's if you want to move fast, you move alone. If you want to move far, you move together. And I think there's lots to say about it. But when I look at the climate data and I see how much pressure there is in the world to act fast, I'm almost sometimes doubting, do we need to work on partnerships, or we just need to get the job done?
I think it's quite a loaded question there, because I definitely think there is necessity for certain people to act fast and do what you can. And I think it boils down to the question of why creating a partnership. What partnership are you trying to create? What's the outcome you're trying to achieve through creating that partnership? So if you can do something small, you can do something on your own, go for it. If you're going to need to team up to make it last longer, do that as well. And I think that's where we're coming with these multi approaches, and definitely working with Commonland and looking at the different landscapes, different teams working on it. It's not like we have one big partnership that's well orchestrated and well coordinated, sometimes we can get an idea in our head and we get something, we'll run with it, we'll test it, because the action's needed. But then what's nice is you can filter your lessons learned back into the bigger learning events, the learning networks, and that's where then it suddenly has a lot of value to have a bigger partnership. But again, it's what's the outcome you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to achieve a lot of impact on the ground with well orchestrated, a lot of moving parts, then you're going to need to sit down and really have a bit more formal partnerships, make sure your principles are aligned, make sure values are aligned, and really take the trouble to do the homework, because you'll start seeing as it gets rolling, it becomes more difficult. But if it's a learning partnership that's very informal, it's often you can, it's brilliant to even disagree, because then you can learn better. You disagree on subjects, you can learn better. And I think so it boils down to what's the outcome you're trying to achieve, and that will define what type of partnerships you're looking for. With farmers, I find the best is just a handshake. I mean, don't overcomplicate it. We'll work the ground, get the job done. When it's done, that's it. And you don't need to overcomplicate it. You don't need to come back with very big MOUs and things like that. But that's the partnerships I like. The jump in the bucky, loose plan and make it work, and then review later.
Yeah. And how do you? So I think that's one of the magics of your work, is working with those farmers, and but you're also trying to let farmers work together and let them in that catchment work, for instance, with government institutes. How do you tackle those ones that are more challenging? Because you also say to get the job done, it's a handshake, but maybe to get a bigger job done, or to look into the future, we're not on an island as well.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's where what we like our knowledge broker. That's a very crucial role in that in our work. But I think in partnerships, you almost get somebody that can understand
more about what is that knowledge broker role?
So the knowledge broker is really somebody that's engaging different platforms, attending events, that has a deeper better understanding of a large group of things. So it's not that you're an expert, but you understand a little bit alongside. And what that really helps is that you can almost become a translator. So your example that you have, we've got a group of farmers, we get together to deal around a water issue. They have to deal with government. Often the language, speaking the same language, speaking English, but the terms that are used, the approaches that are used, the outcomes that they're not quite the same. Principles generally, I find in those can be aligned, and you can try and find out, okay, what are the principles that match and where are the fundamentals that don't, and then try and see, okay, how can we get both groups, in this case, two groups, how can we just use a broker or a mobilizer, somebody that can try and translate what the groups are meaning. And that we can do with various other tools as well, through learning journeys or workshop or engaging. Often it's not a formal partnership agreement between groups. That's maybe the first step that needs to happen, the first intention. And then there's a lot of work thereafter that happens just to make sure that both groups are aligned. But a partnership like that needs better management. I think that's where it comes down to. You can't just, because people have a great idea and they're all wanting to be around the same thing, that it can be just left on its own. I think that's why I find it needs quite a lot of management to make sure people are understanding, people are engaging, and the information's flowing.
Yeah, and then one group of farmers with the government. Are you also working in bigger partnerships with international organizations, or when do you think it becomes too much meetings for the impact but still beneficial? Where do you draw that line?
It's a hard one. I think that's really tough for someone like myself that's based on the ground. That I don't like to attend too many meetings. I don't like to listen to a lot of bureaucracy.
Thank you for being here.
I think it's quite tough, and I often have to ask that question. When is this too much talk and no action? And I think it really, what I'm finding is that our partnership with the UN based, whether it's UN environment or UN development, they have to be a bit more formal. They have to be a bit more bureaucratic. And that's for transparency. I mean, they address it at a global level, and I think that's necessary. So as long as you understand that, it kind of comes across a bit better. But you don't need to use the same approaches for a UN partnership as you do need for a local agricultural association. And I think that's where it's understanding those hierarchies or those levels of what you need to do. And what I have seen, if you jump from the one to the other, that's when it becomes difficult to go, yes, is this not a lot of talk? I mean, some of these conferences, Marijn, you go to them, you're paying a lot of money to get there, a lot of people flying all over the world. You wonder, but it's at the same time, you think, yes, if you didn't have those conferences, then we wouldn't meet the people that you need to meet. You wouldn't get that information being shared. We wouldn't be able to address it at the global level. So there must be something to it as well. It can't be just all hype. But like I said, there is also, where there's smoke, there's fire. There must be something to the myth of the partnerships like, and I think they can become that. So I think it's just a balance of working out, is the outcome, is what you're trying to achieve worth the effort that you're putting into it to address partnerships.
Yeah. I think a partnership is only beneficial if you put the time you put into it is also the time that you get out of it, or at least and that can be also in knowledge or in different kind of it can be in different kind of ways. You can also get knowledge back, but at least you need to solve the challenge. And I think it's also from if you think about collaboration and working together or partnerships, it's always you want to solve a problem that you can't solve by yourself, and you need to find that balance with other organizations. So that could be within an ecologist and the agricultural sector working together, and especially in our work on landscape restoration, or you need to find that balance between all the different parties. Cool. I think, do you have anything more to add, Justin?
No, I think we could probably carry on with this conversation for the next hour, right? But I think we need to wrap it up here. Looking at, I don't know if there'll be quite a lot of questions and answers, and I'd love to engage there a bit more.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Hope it was worth the time not being in the field.
No, that's great. Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Hester.
Thanks, Justin and Marijn. And indeed, a lot of questions popped up, but we will have to save them for the roundtable discussion in the end. It's really interesting to hear about what it actually takes to build a landscape partnership and some of those key challenges involved that you mentioned. I mean, I guess there will always be times when you face difficulties as a partnership, being it organizational or political and environmental, and when the partnership is under pressure. And I guess it all points towards this crucial role of building trust and being able to embrace mistakes. And of course, it's good to hear that partnerships are not just talk and no action. There are already some questions, but in case you have any more questions, please put them in the Q&A and address them to the right person, and we'll try to ask them in the end. But for now, let's jump to the next myth about creating a shared understanding of the landscape. Marijn already pointed towards the importance of this. And if a shared understanding is only about information and data, or if there's more to it. Usually there's already a lot of information available within a landscape, but people know different things and perhaps see things differently. A nice way to illustrate this is the story of the elephant and the blind man. Once upon a time, a group of blind individuals learned of a mysterious creature called an elephant that has arrived in their town. Eager to understand this creature, they decided to explore it by touch, relying on their sense of feel. As they approached the elephant, each person touched a different part. One, feeling the trunk, likened it to a thick snake. Another, touching the ear, thought it resembled a fan. A third, encountering the leg, believed it to be a sturdy pillar akin to a tree trunk. Yet another, exploring the side, deemed it a solid wall. Another, grasping the tail, described it as a rope. And finally, the one who felt the tusk described it as a hard, smooth, and spear-like. So basically, each person's perception of the elephant was shaped by the part they touched, which highlights the importance of multiple perspectives in understanding the whole. Rosa Vendel and Willemijn de Iongh are here today with us to talk about what it means to create and have a shared understanding of a landscape, and how conversations often begin around the return of inspiration. Willemijn is a landscape developer and facilitator at Commonland and on a life's mission to create thriving communities and landscapes. She mainly works in the Dutch landscapes, the river delta, catchment area, South Veluwe, and the Western peat meadow landscape with the organization Wij.land. Speaking of, our second speaker in this conversation is Rosa, who works at Wij.land as a project leader linked to soil and agroforestry, and she's involved in creating a bottom-up movement to connect learning networks. Her work can involve singing, often with Willemijn in fact, which helps to connect people with landscapes in a unique way. And I can only recommend listening to her beautiful song, Hope, which she unfortunately won't sing today, but you can find it on YouTube. Again, don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A, and Rosa and Willemijn, take it away.
Thanks, Hester. Thanks so much for inviting us. I'm really happy to be here with Rosa, a dear friend, but also happily someone working in the same field as I am. So Rosa, of course, we know each other. Would you mind just sharing a little bit more again about what you do, just briefly, and then we can kick back and talk about the shared understanding. Yeah.
Yes, so my name is Rosa Vendel. I work at Wij.land, the organization working in the peat meadow area in the Netherlands. And basically, I spread my time sort of half. So half of my time, I work closely with farmers on soil improvement, agroforestry, or other related topics. And the other half of my time, I sort of work more on a higher up level with partnerships, which we just talked about, or things with the government, sort of more zooming out. And I really enjoy moving between these layers.
Cool, super nice. And we were asked to talk about shared understanding and if you can create a shared understanding based on data and information. And I think I also have a question to the listeners here today. Like when have you ever changed your perspective on your work field or maybe on society based on data only? And I think it's an open door, but it's good because we're in a data intensive society where we value data quite heavily as being informing our strategies and the way we live our lives. And if you want to work on mobilizing people to help restore their landscape, you need to have a shared understanding at some point of what you're working towards, right? So even like a shared dream. So when you work at Wij.land, what do you believe is a shared understanding and what does that actually mean for you? And why do you think that a definition of what a shared understanding is matters?
Yeah. Well, now that you raised the question also of when did you change your mind on data, I actually started thinking of it because my first job was working as a researcher, collecting data at farms to see if we could build this shared knowledge base on sustainable agriculture. And the more and more I visited farms to collect data, the more I spoke to farmers who said things like, yeah, in theory, this is how it should work, but on my farm, actually, so this made me really interested in how we look at knowledge and how we gather knowledge and use it, and this everlasting division between theory and practice. And I at Wij.land, I sort of found a place where we try to connect these worlds. So there's a lot of data in Dutch agriculture, especially with dairy farmers. We work with dairy farmers a lot, and there's so much data collection just in general. The nutritions in the milk, in the mowed grass, the manure, everything's being measured for all kinds of reasons. Some for the farmer, some for the government, some for the company collecting the milk. And still, there's also a lot of unknowing of where should we go with sustainable agriculture and how should we actually use this data. And Wij.land is basically started with working on soil and soil improvement. And what I like is just recently I spoke with the founder of Wij.land, Danielle, about it. And she said they also chose soil, not just because it's so important for healthy soil life, but also because it's just something to work with long-term so that you build trust and you build relationships. And then the data you collect is actually gathered within a relationship between people that know each other, that trust each other, and actually have energy to then build on something.
Yeah, and we touched a little bit on we're living in a society where I think science is super important and we should continue to work based on what the science is telling us. At the same time, I also saw in the chat someone saying that stories are also a form of data. So I think experience-based data and scientific data, I think they could be more balanced in the way we value this in society. And there are also a lot of different forms of knowledge, and you probably see that a lot when you work with farmers that are on the land every day in the community and in their farming community as well. So how would you define the role of all these kinds of different forms of data, written, unwritten, local, scientific, in your work? How is it informing your work?
Well, for me, I think the stories from the ground are the main source. I keep learning from it. Whenever I visit a farm, I learn. And I try to remind myself to have this attitude of listening first, because it's so different if I enter a farm already with something in my mind that I want to collect, or if I have an open mind and I actually listen to what's happening there. Also, if you really just look at the scientific data you can gather, it will still make a difference if the farmer trusts you and actually gives you those facts or not. Like it. So that's one thing, and there was another thing I wanted to say. What I forgot.
No, and I think that's really good, and I want to reiterate that. But because I remember when Wij.land, the organization, started in the landscape, you didn't go in with a pre-planned idea of what you wanted the landscape to look like or work on. It was really a lot of coffee table conversations, listening, right? And that's also what you've done the first months, I think, when you joined the team. Can you share a little bit about how that created a shared understanding of what the farmer wanted, what you wanted as an organization, and how that shaped you?
Yeah. So one of the main things we work on is the soil, and we start with a course that farmers follow, and it's really a broad also story on soil life. And actually the farmers hear the life of soil and everything that's living there, and quite often it's very new to them. And then we take very scientific soil samples, we gather all this data, and then we visit the farms and we actually discuss the data that we collected, but we also walk around and then we have a real conversation. So I love this constant balance between, yes, you collect data and it's very important to measure things, to actually see where we're heading and if the impact you're making is real and stuff. But at the same time, I think it's important to always consider it as an instrument for something bigger or something else, something deeper, that will, the relationship that will actually last longer and that actually make the landscape we all want to make.
True, yeah. And if we're talking about different forms of data, information, and how it can inform the way we act. And of course, it was shared that we sometimes make music together, and you also make poetry. And can you share a little bit about your experience with that? Because it's another form of sharing intelligence, but also inspiration. And could you speak to that?
I never thought these two worlds would meet. I had like a hidden musician life, and I had a life working in agriculture. And then in the Netherlands, it's famous as the nitrogen map. There was this map. Actually, it was not super specific, but it was sort of a map of the Netherlands with restrictions on emissions of nitrogen per area. And it was just suddenly dropped. And all the farmers were angry or sad or hopeless, or because they didn't know, how does this affect me and the future of my farm, and how will I continue? And then from the stories I heard, I started making songs, because I just somehow felt there is something not being understood from both ends. But with all these numbers, there's just something no longer being seen. And that's basically how I started making the poetry and the songs. I since then also made a song from the side of the policymakers. They also have a story to tell. So for me, songs are a way to reconnect and tell the things you can't tell in numbers.
And it's nice for the participants to hear that Rosa also shared the song with the Minister of Agriculture and the Minister of Nature and Nitrogen. So it actually, it came to good ears. So that's really good. And there are some examples that I know of with Wij.land where you've created the shared understanding. So you have the work with the Nature Conservancy. You also shared an example of Joost Samson, one of the farmers who visited the ministry. Could you talk to that a little bit?
The story of Joost, you mean?
Yeah, or whichever you like best.
Yeah. Well, I like that story best for sure.
Okay, go for it.
So yeah, as Wij.land, we visited the Ministry of Agriculture and Nature to share what we do and how we could cooperate more. And with us, we brought one of the farmers from a network, Joost Samson, who's doing anything you can imagine to improve nature and have nature and agriculture collaborate. And at some point, he got the question from one of the policymakers, asking, "Hey, you built this sort of restaurant tower. Was this a way for you to get a different business model? Because otherwise, you would not, make enough to survive." And then he started smiling and he said, "Well, actually, I just promised my wife a tower in this being overwhelmed with love for her. I promised her the tower, and that's why I built it." And you felt in the audience this sort of, there's more than just practical, just efficiency. There's also inspiration and beauty and other values in the landscape. And it's really the people in the landscape that give that.
Yeah. It's so cool. I mean, we're not robots driven by data input. We are also human beings that maybe sometimes do things because we want to, or because we love our wives or husbands, or
Exactly.
everything in between. And can you share the other one with the Nature Conservancy? I also really like that one.
Yeah, you mean the van pachter
Van pachter naar partner.
Yes. Yes, from pachter naar partner, which is Dutch for from tenant to partner. Well,
yeah.
It was a project, or is a project, where farmers and a nature organization in the Netherlands started collaborating. The farmers work in an area where they are close to protected nature areas, so there are a lot of restrictions and also more restrictions coming. And there was quite a lot of distrust between the farmers and the nature organization. So we started the project to see if we could build more trust and see if they could collaborate more together. And basically, the thing is, it's not always very complex. We started with excursions to each other. What are you actually doing? What are your goals? How are you getting there? And always when you actually visit the place and walk around the farm or walk around the nature meadow, there's more you can see and experience and feel and hear than if you only hear the story. So that already made a difference. But then what also really makes a difference is that when you actually, this also I think relates to the first topic, when you actually work together on something practical. So you don't just stay in abstract conversations on what should nature be or what should agriculture be. But we started measuring the quality of the soil, and both parties need a healthy soil life. So it became something to practically collaborate on, do analyses on, and that was a fruitful ground to get more trust and better relationships. And now for a few years now, they've had a really good relationship and contracts on how to maintain the lands.
That's amazing. I think it's such a great example in a country, and I think there are multiple countries around the world where agriculture and nature are very strictly divided, also by law and the way we jurisdictionally arrange it. And I think it's so nice to soften that barrier, also by softening the barrier between people and their living worlds and their views and their beliefs. And so I think it's an amazing example. And just one closing example is the one from Welkom in het Wij.land, where there was also a farmer who learned something from public servants, I remember. I don't know which farmer it was, but he said something around that he thought it was easy, or that he thought that public servants had it easy or something. What was the story again?
Yeah, we sometimes now organize Welcome to the Wij.land, Welcome to the Meadow, with farmers and policymakers. And one time there was also, it was quite heavy and tense between them. And at the end, the farmers said to the policymakers, well, we thought we had a rough time, but it's actually must be tough to be a policymaker. And as a joke, but also actually meaning it and being able to empathize also with them. So yeah, it just shows the importance of getting a shared understanding.
Super nice. Yeah, I can talk about this forever because I think this is such a valuable topic. And yeah, thank you for your time, Rosa. And I hope the listeners enjoyed it. I did. And the floor is back to you, Hester.
Thanks, Willemijn and Rosa. It's so lovely to hear these beautiful and interesting stories, which I think so much show the strong role of inspiration when opening people's hearts and bringing everyone and everything together. And I can imagine that a lot of people listening today might actually recognize themselves in some things that you've been describing. And if you have any questions for Willemijn or Rosa, or if you see things differently, please put any questions you have in the Q&A. So, having discussed the topic of building a landscape partnership and obtaining a shared understanding, the natural next step is to think about creating a shared vision for a landscape. Ideally, a vision of a landscape unites people, represents an inspiring future for the landscape, and is created bottom up. But linked to the myth we're discussing, traditionally creating a landscape vision might have been a bit top down. So let's discuss in this third conversation how to prevent that and ensure that a landscape vision is really locally led and what a landscape vision actually is. Lucy, Gird, and Jeroen Jurriëns will join me in this conversation. Lucy works at the Landscape Finance Lab and is a technical specialist for landscape restoration, climate change, and conservation finance. She holds a PhD in conservation and international development, has a fantastic sense of humor, and knows all about finance for forest and landscape restoration. Jeroen works at Wetlands International as Program Manager Community Resilience. He's definitely one of those incredibly driven persons in the field of landscape restoration, especially focused at community resilience towards disasters. And he has a lot of experience in applying participatory methods, which we will touch upon later. Lucy and Jeroen, welcome. It's great to have the both of you in this conversation. Jeroen, to kick things off, could you tell us a bit more about what a landscape vision actually is, as I know it can take many forms, and why it's important to create one?
Yeah, thanks so much, Hester, for this opportunity to join this discussion, and thanks for organizing this webinar. Yeah, indeed, a vision can take many forms, but I think the core of a vision is that it's about a shared aspiration of stakeholders about their own landscape, where they live in, their watershed or river basin. This vision can be, as you said, like something like a written text, but from our experience, it is much more powerful to have a vision in the form of like a visual or picture as well. That shows how you want the landscape to be. So that also signals that it's like a long-term visual or perspective, looking towards 20 or 30 years into the future. And this vision is important since it serves as a source of inspiration for the stakeholders and members in the landscape. When stakeholders are inspired by this vision, it can really drive collaboration. And when defined, a vision provides guidance for like discussing and selecting the priorities of what needs to happen in a landscape or watershed. I could continue a lot more, but maybe that's for...
Yeah, thanks, Jeroen. Yeah, so Lucy, do you have any additions? And if not, or after, could you share an example of some of your experiences of creating a landscape vision?
Thanks, Hester. And I think building on what you said, Jeroen, the idea that
the landscape vision can be a central component, building on all of the work that's previously gone in, creating these landscape partnerships, understanding who in the landscape needs to be involved in creating these visions, and building that shared understanding of what's going on in the landscape, what are the current issues that each of these stakeholders are facing, is an important step to be able to develop this collaboration and this shared vision. I'd like to share an example of a landscape vision in the Flow Country in Scotland. This in the Flow Country is one of the largest blanket bogs in Europe, and there's a huge carbon potential in the landscape, which contains more than twice the amount of carbon than all of the carbon in the woodlands in the UK combined, and has huge potential to be restored due to, and the degradation is from previous unsustainable farming practices. A lot of work has gone on in the landscape in understanding which of the stakeholders needs to be involved, and a high level, long-term evolving vision was created in 2020. Obviously 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, this was actually conducted online rather than in person. And I think when it was revised in 2023, and that was an in-person workshop, and really there's a lot of benefit to be seen of having those connections, face-to-face discussions, and really understanding each of the stakeholders' needs and trying to create a collective vision amongst that. So let me just share. Here we go. This was the Flow Country Partnership Vision that was created. This was the revised vision from 2023. Overall, the vision had a mission to collectively develop a revitalised and sustainably managed landscape to not only restore the peatlands and safeguard them against threats like wildfires and bolstering Scotland's net zero ambitions by 2045, but also aimed to create conditions for thriving communities. In developing the vision, it aimed to bring together a diverse community and stakeholders involved, including farmers, landowners, crofters, residents, ecologists and local government, and a few of the stakeholders are in that slide there. And it's rooted in the fundamental independence between a resilient flow country landscape and thriving resilient communities. Key to the 2023 revision of the landscape was trying to bring together increasing concentric circles of stakeholders and those who should be involved in developing the vision. And the central component for this was the word resilience, and it really brought together lots of different stakeholders with this idea, or their ideas of the vision for the flow country for the future, that not only focused on the resilience of the peatlands to protect the blanket bog and restore them and implement and enrich it with best practices, but also to create resilience for the community as well, to protect the traditional heritage and communities that are up there, and reduce migration out of the area, restore skills and opportunities in the landscape, not just related to peatlands, but starting to really broaden out social economic opportunities for sustainable land use, but also investment to come into the landscape, and enrich, visibility and connectivity and awareness and appreciation of the landscape as well. And all of these different elements obviously touching on not just your natural returns from the protection of the peatlands and, the protection of the carbon in those peatlands, but things like inspirational returns, really focusing on bringing people's connection to the landscape at the core of this landscape vision, so that the communities and other stakeholders can really see themselves in the vision and feel part of it going forward. And also social and financial returns as well, through sustainable communities and economic investment that's compatible with safeguarding the features that make this peatland important. This partnership vision aims to enable the implementation of specific initiatives as part of the Flow Country Partnership. And
also as well as part of the application for UNESCO World Heritage Site, for which they'll find out next month whether they've got that for the flow country, but also aiming to strengthen community integration into the process and implementation of activities and leaderships through these mutually enforcing pathways of protection, restoration and enrichment in the landscape.
Great, thanks Lucy. Thanks for sharing this example, and it's really interesting to see and hear this. Jeroen, having heard this, I'm very curious to hear about some of your experiences with creating a landscape vision. So would you also be willing to share an example with us?
Yes, of course. Thanks so much. Let me share the example of our, and let me first share it before continuing. So this is actually showing the example of our Building with Nature work in Indonesia, which is done in Demak, which is on the north coast of Java. This vision is actually the picture at the far bottom of the screen. And it was visualized into a map or plan for the landscape, the wetland landscape, the coastal landscape, which really made it easier to communicate and gain buy-in from a wide group of stakeholders on what needs to happen in the landscape. Basically, on this screen, you see the baseline situation and two future scenarios, which were used in the process. So the top one is the baseline scenario with a few mangrove belts remaining, and actually a coastline susceptible to erosion, and also with land subsidence like lowering the level of the ground, leading to increased flooding in the area. So in that sense, echoing what Lucy was saying, resilience and community resilience was a convening theme in this landscape as well. The business as usual scenario, then the middle picture shows actually that erosion and land subsidence causes the mangrove belt to disappear completely and flooding to be there in a large part of the landscape. What was done was actually develop like this dream scenario or vision, which you see at the bottom, of really how the landscape can be if you intervene in the right way. The vision is actually, and I should actually switch to this one. The vision is actually a vision of a mangrove-based economy, which really contributes to the sustainability of the landscape and the resilience of communities. A future with flourishing mangroves and livelihoods for the people living in the landscape. And how was this vision created? It was really a process. And that process started at the community level, engaging with communities, being there with them in the local setting, in their village, and gaining insights in the local situation. And over time, it started to include more and more stakeholders. This was done through public-private partnerships, including local and national governments, as well as private sector partners, and moving towards implementation of community-based work. And that whole process was also, which was mentioned before, aimed at building trust and understanding amongst the different stakeholders involved. And keeping in that process discussing on this vision for the future. The government took really ownership of this vision and started replicating and upscaling the implemented approach in this area towards other areas as well. So I think what it showed us was really that a vision can really help to unite and to inspire, and then realization can come from that vision that really something can be done in this area. You can see in this dream scenario actually that instead of having the rice fields disappearing because of the flooding happening more frequently, erosion increasing, that building this mangrove belt really can protect the ground levels behind it. And doing that in a participatory way is really important, because I mean, it's not simply building the mangrove belt and then it's there, the protection is there. It needs to follow a process of regenerative regeneration of the mangrove belt. So it takes time, and this long-term vision and the inspiration from this dream vision really helped to bring all stakeholders on board.
Thanks, Jeroen. Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear and see that a landscape vision can take such different forms already looking at these two examples. For the sake of time, I can only ask one more question to the both of you. So I'm going to ask you to be a little bit concise here. So going back to the myth we're discussing today, that visioning is a top-down process, I'm very curious to hear some of your experiences with this and how to ensure that visioning is a bottom-up inclusive process that is locally led. So can you relate to this and could you give an example? Maybe first going to Lucy.
Thanks, Hester. I will go back to talking about the flow country. I think when we went the revision of the landscape vision in 2023, because the challenge for the first vision in 2020 was that it was developed during COVID, so not everything could be captured online. So in 2023, this community-led workshop was facilitated by the Landscape Finance Lab and Commonland, built on this vision. But to ensure that it was a locally led process, it was designed together with landscape champions over a 4-month period beforehand. This was to ensure that we were able to capture community voices and that they were integrated throughout the whole process. And would enable that to reflect the community needs and address key challenges in the current vision and the work plan that was linked to this. Another element that sort of kept it focused on being locally led, apart from co-creating the process, was also setting the workshop locally, putting it right in the centre of the flow country itself, which is a beautiful landscape to be placed in anyway. But it made it accessible and applicable to local people, and keeping that feeling of connection to the landscape as well, and allowed some breaking down of assumptions from participants, which was important to make different stakeholders feel heard, included in the process and valued in the vision as well. So simple elements like, circle work, that everyone felt equal and part of it, playful sessions such as 3D modelling, which was fantastic. And that was enabled also to continually and understand different perspectives of different stakeholders for our lens, but also just because, coming from different backgrounds, and kept it very informal as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. I think those are some very crucial aspects you're touching upon. Jeroen, what is your perspective on this topic?
Yes, I think I already highlighted that participation and dialogue are key in landscape skill work. I mean, being present on the ground, working with our local office there, with local stakeholders. So creating this vision together. So it requires continuous discussions, dialogues, and the vision evolves over time. I think there's different ways multiple ways actually to organize participatory processes and community dialogues and stakeholder dialogues. Some ways we have used within Wij.land International is using this approach called a mutual gains approach, which brings different stakeholders together to get really a better understanding of each other's needs, but also of each other's interest, to really facilitate a dialogue together and to find a common idea for the future together by understanding each other's positions, backgrounds, and the shared elements in that, so to create that vision. And what also really works, and I think that was highlighted before by other speakers as well, is visits to the fields, so exposure visits, peer review visits, farmers, community members from the one community to visit the other, to be inspired by their own peers. I mean, it's the best way to bring about the story that has been told. And yeah, that's what are some of the participatory approaches that really work. And during such visits, people not only see each other's challenges, but also interact in a natural way and create their shared understanding during such visits. And we're quite, I mean, this Building with Nature Indonesia example was rewarded the UN Decades of Restoration flagship program, and that brings actually a lot of visits to the area as well. So by doing so, I mean, inspiration to others is happening as well in other landscapes, we hope.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jeroen and Lucy, for sharing your very valuable insights and experiences. And I guess we can only conclude that having an appealing vision can greatly help to inspire and bring people together around a shared goal and boost long-term collaboration for landscape restoration. So thanks for your input. And good to know that in the guidebook you can find more information about participatory methods, the one that Jeroen mentioned, and also some more general information about creating a landscape vision. Okay, so we've discussed all 3 myths, and the For Returns enthusiasts among you might have noticed that by now we've discussed 3 out of 5 elements from the For Returns framework: building a landscape partnership, creating a shared understanding, and creating a landscape vision. Now, you might have become curious about the last 2 elements, which are taking action, not unimportant, and monitoring and learning, also not unimportant. But there's only so much you can and want to discuss in a webinar. So today we won't go into these last 2 elements. But luckily we have our resident Rose, who will tell you much more about where to find practical guidance, examples, tools, and case studies about all 5 elements of the For Returns framework. Rose, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Esther. All right, I will share my screen. Yes, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hello, so my name is Rose and I am a landscape learning developer at Commonland. And I'm very excited to be here today because I'm able to announce the launch of a new guidebook called the For Returns Framework in Practice, a guidebook for holistic landscape restoration, which Commonland has published in collaboration with the Landscape Finance Lab and Wetlands International. I would like to start with the For Returns framework, the basis for the guidebook. Already touched upon, of course, and specifically the 5 elements, but here you can see the full framework. So the For Returns framework is a practical, holistic approach to long-term, large-scale landscape restoration. And it contains several components, as you can see. There are the 5 elements. They really help you to guide the process. There are the For Returns. They are the impacts that will be delivered to the landscape and its stakeholders. The 3 zones, they help you zoom out to the landscape scale and see also how different purposes can actually coexist in a landscape. And there are then the 20+ years, which are the component which help you think long-term, something that's very necessary in holistic landscape restoration. And well, over the past decades, this For Returns framework has been applied in landscapes around the world, in close collaboration with landscape partners. And many valuable lessons have actually been learned from this along the way. And what we see specifically is that while each landscape and each context is of course very different, there are also quite a lot of lessons and a lot of knowledge that applies more broadly, which is useful to be shared among different practitioners. And now that the For Returns framework is applied by more and more landscapes and different international and local organizations around the world, we also more and more often get the question, great framework, but how do I actually apply it in practice? So next slide. That is why we created the For Returns framework in practice guidebook, together with Wetlands International and the Landscape Finance Lab. And well, it's published on the For Returns platform, which is at the same time also the go-to place for all the different For Returns related resources, examples, and inspiration. And this online environment is also really designed so that you can easily consume the guidebook, jump between different chapters and dive in to the tools and methods that are linked into the guidebook right away. But before I dive deeper in the next slides, I just want to go into the question. Can you go to the next slide? Yes, thanks. Why would this guidebook be useful to you? Well, and I would give 3 main reasons then. First of all, I already touched on it. It is actually based on more than a decade of experience implementing the For Returns approach in landscapes. And this is also a wide variety of landscapes, different contexts, many different stories. So it's really based on practice. Secondly, it really simplifies the complexity of large-scale holistic landscape restoration. Holistic landscape restoration is naturally complex, and it can feel overwhelming. So this guidebook really aims to break it down for you, to take you along step by step, in approachable language, in an approachable manner. Yeah, that's helpful, hopefully. And finally, making holistic landscape restoration also practical. While of course the knowledge is based on common concepts and thorough understanding of the research and the knowledge that's there, we really aim to make this guidebook also very hands-on. So it has many tools and methods that you can apply right away in practice. All right, so in the next slides, we then go into what can we actually find in the guidebook. The 5 elements, we know them by now, are actually the basic structure of the guidebook. And what's important to mention is that while there's a certain order to the 5 elements, in practice we actually see that they don't occur in a linear order. Rather, they can be used as guideposts, where maybe in one phase certain elements are more important than another, and they work in an iterative way. That's also how the guidebook is actually designed. So you can jump into those different sections that are actually relevant for the context and the phase that you are in at the moment. All right, so in the next slide, I can show you the specific content that's in the guidebook. As you can see, it's indeed structured by the different elements. And then there's also a section on the foundation, which really unpacks the Fortins framework, but also really the different returns and the different stories around that. There are 17 chapters, and each of the chapters contains, again, different tools and methods. So you can actually dive into those topics that are relevant to you. And yeah, unfortunately, I don't have an hour, so I can't guide you through all the different elements, but I really welcome you to explore it yourself. Just want to end with this final slide indeed. How do you then actually dive into it? I already mentioned the Fortins platform is really the main gateway to the guidebook. On here, you can not only find the guidebook itself, but also many of the tools and the methods directly. So if you make a profile also on the platform, then you can actually use some of the tools directly on there. And it also allows you to dive into the different elements and jump around the content that's useful to you. There will also be PDFs available for those who would maybe like to print parts of it. So keep an eye on our socials for that. And there will also be actually a limited edition print guidebook available for partners, experts, universities and libraries from August onwards. And this print guidebook is really meant for practitioners that will really use it in practice. So all the relevant information and the link will be posted in the chat. Thanks for listening and enjoy the guidebook.
Thanks, Rose. And let us indeed know if you have any difficulties finding or accessing the guidebook. I now invite all of our speakers to unmute themselves again and turn their video on, because it's time for the last part of this event, the round table discussion. Please, speakers, raise your hand if you want to respond to any of the other speakers. Good to have you all back, and let's go straight to the first question. I think this is an interesting question for Justin or Marijn. It's a question from Nina. She asks, speaking from experience from Kenya, partnerships are clearly a buzzword everyone seems to agree upon. And while I see a lot of sincere efforts within similar value-aligned ecosystems or stakeholders, I observe that many of the approaches are too siloed, especially aligning to governmental policies, programming, or local community leadership. What is your learning here? Any advice? And also, what works in building trust amid pressure for short-term gains? When are power dynamics a reality? It's a lot of questions, but I can imagine that there's something to touch upon for you.
Yeah, no, I think Marijn, do you want I can tackle this one if you're happy with it?
Go ahead.
I think. Okay, I think that is that's always the challenge with these sorts of interventions, is that they do become a buzzword, and partnerships especially have become a buzzword. In fact, it's a lot of other things I've seen in trying to address climate crisis or landscape rehabilitation. Things become a buzzword and then they end up being used for the wrong reasons. And I think that's why that myth came about, that partnerships are just talk and no action. You're definitely seeing it. We're definitely seeing partnerships, the creation of partnership being the main outcome, and not the outcome of the partnership being the outcome. And I think that's we're definitely seeing a lot of that. So I agree. I've also seen. And coming back to the power imbalances, I think this is what we're seeing with governments, especially on the shorter term. A lot of these challenges that we're trying to face are multi-generational and definitely not more than a government term. And often groups come in, try to create a partnership, trying to address a complex problem in a very short way, and just eventually just tell lies or just try and greenwash the situation in order to get the short-term action. But that's why, yeah, exactly, the long-standing partnerships, your long-standing, the people on the ground that have the trust. I think that's very important in our work, to identify that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Does anyone else want to respond to this? Okay, well, there's enough other questions. I think this is an interesting question to the whole group. Ignacio says, I think decisions must be based on science and data, but the key part is how to communicate the same piece of information depending on who you are talking to. So yeah, what is this role of communication and storytelling, having those different audiences in mind? So anyone who wants to share? I see it touches upon the conversation that Willemijn and Rosa had.
Yeah, so can you repeat the question just one more time? Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about decision making and whether it's based on science and data, but also how to communicate such pieces of data to different audiences.
Yeah.
Works in practice.
Yeah, I think on the one hand, thank God for science, and thank God for having to, make very clear academic definitions of what we actually mean when we use certain words. And on the other hand, I think we always need to remain conscious that whatever science, the data is whatever we can measure. And there are always things we can't measure and get into numbers that are also important. So that's just something that comes to my mind. And well, I have to think of one time when we had a conversation with farmers and policymakers, and I think halfway through the conversation, they found out they meant something different with the word nature. So yeah, I think getting a clear definition, but in that, not just looking for the academic definition, but also getting to an understanding of each other's life worlds is very crucial.
Yeah, thanks, Rosa. I think that's a great example. Willemijn, do you have any additions or any others from the group?
I think.
Oh, I see Marijn. Oh, go ahead.
Go for it.
Okay,
well,
Marijn.
Maybe just a nice example also from South Africa, in close to where Justin is now. When we were started to work there and tried to build a collaboration, and it was very much based on science. And we tried to do a lot of science to understand the system better and to understand what we could potentially do in that catchment. And I remember very clearly that we were busy with all the farmers, setting up everything, inviting the funders, inviting the government, and we built this whole partnership together. And there was one farmer who stood up and he said, just fire all the scientists, please. Fire everybody, just give us the money as the farmers, and we will do it. We know on this land for ages. We know how to deal with it. And fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, the farmer didn't get the funds. But I think what's highlighting that it might be for some people, for science is the main driver, but not for everybody. And I think it's very important to understand all stakeholders in the system to make decisions.
Thanks, Marijn. I'm not sure if everyone in the audience today indeed will be happy if all scientists are fired. Jeroen, did you want to respond?
Yeah, an attempt to provide a response. I think indeed, I mean, in the Indonesia case, we work with like local universities and bringing in science data. I think the example scientific data showed that actually replanting mangrove blankly is not successful. I mean, 80% of those projects fail. And that's why, I mean, natural regeneration of the mangrove coastline there by setting up bamboo structures which resulted that sediment would flow through and that mangroves would regenerate naturally was the way to go. And that's science shows that. But then also, I mean, you could invest times and years in developing the proper right system of the bamboo structure to do that. But what comes to mind there was that the learning was like, let's start with something, improve it along the way, and adaptive management is what the keyword which comes in there. I mean, sure, you should not act contrary to what science says, but then let's start at some point and improve along the way. I mean, if you involve local knowledge, local universities, and private companies with expertise on that, and knowledge institutes, NGOs, then you can start and improve along the way.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Jeroen.
and I think just to add to the mix, there are farmers that have like also a scientific background and sometimes do their own research. And there are also scientists that have maybe an activity on the farm. So it's also not like putting someone in a box forever and not expecting that person to also have different forms of knowledge. I think it's to be open-minded in that a farmer can actually also read a research paper and then get him or herself acquainted with something and the other way around as well. So being a bit mild to the other actors you're engaging.
Indeed. And in terms of communicating, I mean, let farmers speak to farmers as well, and scientists to scientists. I mean, this peer communication and showing people on the ground what happens inspires and also builds trust in scientific findings if you can show in a pilot what works already.
Thanks. Lucy.
Thanks, Hester. I think building on that in terms of communication, and what we found in the flow country as well was to meet the community on their terms as well. If you are going to be communicating things, organising a workshop is not necessarily going to be the way to do it. Is there a coffee shop that people go to on a regular basis that's a better way for you to sit there and engage with them? And I think it's also about finding out what suits the context of the landscape and the stakeholders in that landscape to really understand what's the best way of communicating to them that meets their needs and their and meets them on their terms as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I think indeed that's a very good conclusion, that different things work for different people in different contexts. Which links a little bit to a question from Bart. He asks, how would you create a shared understanding among stakeholders that have a ton of weight and experience in various disciplines, but are inspired to restore, but they are new still to the shifting paradigm of for returns? So how does it work to bring such a group of people together and think collectively out of the box? Is there anyone who would like to share some thoughts on this? Perhaps Lucy?
Thank you. I think this builds on my previous comment about sort of the context. And I think in the workshop to revise the landscape vision for the flow country, we had a mixture of stakeholders from government, from science, from the community members working to restore the peatlands and also working in the peatlands. And, you know, we're sort of in sort of discussions to bring to the table to start restoration. And there was a specific moment where one of the scientists was talking, and they were talking about the climate impact of peatlands, and particularly wildfires and peatlands. And it was a moment which brought or sort of sparked an understanding across different groups of people, you know, particularly those working in the landscape, that they could see a different picture and how that impacted them and their perspective and their understanding of the landscape. So I think, as well as sort of understanding how to communicate the 4 returns to sort of understand a more holistic vision of a landscape, also enabling spaces where people can discuss their perspectives and share their own understanding of a landscape that can be heard by others in different stakeholders, can help kickstart the sort of shift, this system shift that we're looking at with the 4 returns framework, and allow people to really hear what other people's views and vision of the landscape is, and allowing space for those discussions to be held. Might sound very simple, but it's incredibly valuable to move the dialogue and the process forward.
Jeroen, how do you perceive this?
Yeah, let me just share what popped up in my mind, and then you can judge whether it's the right reply to the question. I was recently in Ethiopia, in like this degraded land, a bare land, which used to be really green like decades ago. And we do restoration work there as part of a landscape restoration process. And we were there with a donor visit. And this community leader was actually sharing a reflection. And he was saying, youth now has an employment. The area is regreening. Actually, my vision for the future is that this area is green again. The communities have their livelihoods. Ecotourism can pop in. So basically, he shared his vision for the future, and he said, like, I see this change happening and we're moving towards it. And to me, that was the strongest message of not talking about 4 returns, but saying like, I have a vision, and he articulated like natural returns, like the regreening, social returns, better interaction between youth and elderly. What's the other one? So financial returns, I mean, economic incentives and inspiration. I mean, he was inspiring and inspired me greatly. So I don't know if there was a reply, but was definitely, I mean, those people can convince other stakeholders on the value of working on a landscape vision, a landscape process. And whether you use 4 returns, yes or no, in one way, it really helps to structure the dialogue and the direction that it's all encompassing. All those 4 returns should be touched upon. But if you step in people's lives, actually their lives are about inspiration, natural, social, and economic returns.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, Jeroen. I think that's a great example and approved as a response. For the sake of time, I would suggest that we go to the last question. It's a bit more specific question, might be interesting for Rosa or Jeroen, but any others are free to respond. The question is from from Murph. And the question is, we're working on a video game about land restoration and trying to find partners. Is there a way to find these partners, or are video games perceived as a less serious subject on this matter? It's a bit more specific, but perhaps someone has experience on this topic or has something to share about it.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, so the question is, how would partners perceive the video game potentially? Or I don't know much about it, but I know I hear more and more about it, and actually it is being seen as a very playful way to tackle this. So I'm all up for video games in this theme. But we don't have experience with it ourselves yet. But if we could start a small collaboration from Wij.land, we're very open to it.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Yeah, Jeroen?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, different audiences, different communication ways. And of course, I mean, video games or games can be a way to reach a target audience interested in that. I was even thinking, like, I don't know if you know about the game of Minecraft, like building landscapes, buying money. And so that's also about landscape skill work. And I think we could indeed use such kind of games in reaching the message on landscape restoration as well. Yeah, and I don't know about the details of this request, but indeed, I mean, landscape scale examples, I mean, happy to explore collaborations in that respect. Thanks.
Yeah, open invite to Merv to send more details on the request. Marijn.
Yeah, this is not on the video game, but this is on the on a board game. So I think it's just about gamification. I played myself a very cool game that Justin developed in the Baviaanskloof quite a long time back. But also our colleague Dieter van den Broek is working on a game on landscape restoration. But that's a board game. So I think it's a small step to make it from a board game to into reality, and I think that is the perfect way also to send a message.
Thanks, Marijn. Roos, perhaps we can make the Forage Guidebook into a video game. Just an idea for the future.
Sounds great. I'm happy to hear ideas and explore that. Yeah, I think gamification and making things in a game format is very interesting, and definitely a way to reach people that you might not reach with other forms of communication.
Yeah, thanks. Fully agree. All right. Thanks everyone for being here with us today and for your great questions. And speakers, thanks for answering them and of course for making this event today. I'm sorry if I didn't get a chance to ask all of your questions, but please reach out to us on Instagram or LinkedIn and we'll try to answer them there. And if you became curious about the Forage's Guidebook, please go check it out at forreturns.commonland.com. You can find the link in the chat. Again, thanks everyone for attending today. Keep up the good work and enjoy the rest of your day. And for the Dutchies and the Austrian and any other football enthusiasts, enjoy the match, which is about to start in 4 minutes. Goodbye.